Watch the video all the way through. The thing I wanted to show you in this video is that the awesome oscillator down here in the weekly time frame is suggesting that with the S&P's breakout on light volume out on Christmas Eve on an abbreviated trading session with holiday trading, not very convincing, but the breakout, light volume on an abbreviated session on holiday trading, the awesome oscillator suggesting we're either going to peak this coming week here, this new week of trading, or the week after that. In the next 9 sessions, Awesome Oscillator is suggesting with the divergence that is forming that the S&P will top and reverse with a double top. It could happen next week, this week, I should say now. The holiday trading continuing with New Year's week. Again, a short trading week, abbreviated session on New Year's Eve, or just after the holiday trading the following week. But the Awesome Oscillator suggesting in the next 9 sessions, we should see a peak on the S&P 500 and a reversal. And history repeats itself. We shouldn't go very much higher than this week's high, but still could move a little bit higher as we did in 2022 and 2025, right before a reversal and a big rug pull that gave us a massive sell-off. Well, I'm going to show you this. Watch the video all the way through. Awesome Oscillator suggesting we should either see a peak next week or the week after that within the next 9 sessions. And it is possible we get it next week or just right after next week ends. But again, watch the video all the way through and you'll see what I mean. Please support the channel with the link directly below that allows me to be able to provide you this information. If you follow the link below, it'll take you to a secured site. You can donate any amount you want. I thank you for your consideration for that. We're talking about the double top pattern with the awesome oscillator and the breakout on super light volume. We broke out on Christmas Eve to a new high. In 2022, we broke out the day after Christmas to a new high. I mean, it's very similar. It's really interesting how closely we are following what happened in 2022. Just be aware that as we're forming that double top, you got people, oh no, we got an inverse head and shoulders now. Oh, double top, we have an inverse head and shoulders, and we just broke out on super light volume. Oh, wow, on holiday volume. Similar pattern, by the way, in 2022 and 2025, but again, it was, those were double tops. This is a double top. Major resistance in the weekly time frame directly overhead, and you have major resistance long term with this channel. We slammed up into it October 29th. We slammed up into this level, turned off of it. We're slamming up into it again. Again, it's likely you're going to turn off this level, and that's going to create the double top in the daily time frame. And again, you're going to move off of this level. This isn't the buying opportunity of a lifetime. Oh, this breakout, this inverse head and shoulders. It's not the opportunity of a lifetime. People that are buying it believing we have a breakout are likely buying a top like in 2000 or 2007 or 1929. Again, Bitcoin is warning. Market is going to have a major sell-off. It's going to follow Bitcoin. Bitcoin's about to get its next, or has already started its second leg down in the market. To play catch up, NASDAQ has already peaked. S&P is now diverging with NASDAQ. I've talked about this scenario. But if S&P ended up moving to a new high, that would happen. You'd have a 2022 style topping process and really repeat what happened with the 2022 top for the S&P. Bitcoin and NASDAQ peaked in late 2021. Same thing's happening right now. Just keep this monthly chart in your mind. I showed you the weekly in my last video. In my last update, I talked about the double top formation here in 2022, and repeating this all over again. NASDAQ not moving to new highs, and again has probably already topped, whereas S&P is diverging with it just like it did back over here in 2022, and you're getting a breakout on very, very light volume on Christmas Eve, a partial trading day. So not a very convincing breakout, but again, likely what we saw over here. I want to show you something on the weekly chart, but before I do, again, we broke out to a new high and then went higher, started to pull back, went slightly above the previous peak, and then reversed, breaking a new high, peaking 7 sessions later, reversing hard, giving back all of the gains and going down and taking out the 100 period. And that breakout and reversal happened over a 2-week period in 2022. You can see it right here. Again, the breakout, little topping tail. We went slightly higher the following week. Could see something similar to that next week, but then we reversed hard by the end of the week back to the 10-week moving average, eventually taking it out and dropping nearly 13% over a couple of weeks here, a few weeks, and then a rebound, and then ending up dropping around 14.5% or so, I believe around 14.5% or so over the next 8 weeks over that reversal, from that reversal at the peak. But or a 2-week, a breakout and then a reversal bar moving to slightly higher levels. That was the 2022 top. Now, we had a similar double top pattern in early 2025 with peak in February of 2025, peaking the first peak peaking there in late 2024. This week right here of November, December, starting off December there, saw a sell-off, went up here, moved above this level, just barely closed above it, but moved up above it about 28 points, and then sold off some more back to the 20-week moving average here in the weekly time frame at this 2025 peak that led to a 21% sell-off in the S&P. This was our last major sell-off. We got that peak there in January, pulled back to the 20-week moving average, and then slightly moved above that level. Couldn't close above it. We actually moved above it. The high right here was at the same level, and then we pushed up through it by about 20 points, about really 19, rounding up to about 20 points higher, and then this followed. The high right here was near this level. It was about a point below it. This high right here, 61.28. This high right here, 61.27 and some change. But then we went higher above this 61.28 area. We went higher to 61.47. So about just over 19 points, almost 20 points, just rounding up there, 19 points and some change or so. And then we reversed hard. And I think you're going to see something very similar, but as what I'm going to show you is related to this, and that is that we're up here for a week or two, or even from the closing high, the previous closing high. You closed above that high to a new closing high, and then the next week you went a little bit higher and you reversed, if we just look at it on a closing basis rather than the intra-week high, I should say. The point I'm trying to show you, our last peak in February of 2025 was a double top pattern, is that you're up here for about a week or two, and then you get a big rug pull and a sharp sell-off. Now, I talked about previous high in October being a peak, but I also told you that there was still the possibility that S&P would diverge from a NASDAQ as it did back in 2022. If that happened, you would get that double top scenario. That ended up happening. I told you there was a very good chance S&P was peaking with the Fed on October 29th. I still think NASDAQ did peak, but warned you if we went back up to hit the upper channel line in the weekly time frame, you could see a double top scenario like in 2022. I've talked about this for weeks and weeks and weeks. Ever since that peak, I told you that is still a possibility. I think you're going to get this scenario. Now, the thing I wanted to establish is that you get above the previous high, and here on a closing basis, there for 2 weeks. If you look at it for an intra-week basis, you were there for 1 week above that level, above that previous high, but quickly reversed. So keeping that in your mind, and also here, when we moved in 2022, above the previous high, which I think this is closer to what we have right now. Again, you went a little bit higher the following week, but that also triggered a reversal that next week. So we have formed these last two double tops. You were there for a week or two. Both were followed by very sharp reversals. The breakout was a fake out. And we've got this situation where we have now triple negative diversions. I talked about that in the weekly time frame in my last video. Again, we've had this breakout to a new high. Do we quickly see a reversal? This is our current price action here in December of 2025. Now, in my last video, I talked about how we had now a triple divergence in the weekly time frame, and you can see the triple divergence in the most recent price action right here, the larger multiple point divergence right here, and I talked about how we have this divergence in the daily time frame in the most recent price action, the larger divergence. You can see it here on the MACD, you can see it here on the RSI. You can see the divergences that are developing in the daily and the weekly time frame surrounding this potential double top that I think has a really good shot of playing out here with the reversal starting either next week or the week after that. As I've shown you, push up to new highs, you're usually there just a week or two. So I expect these divergences to play out in the daily and the weekly time frame. I think I have a double top here, very similar to the double top back over here. Here it is in the weekly time frame with the divergence on the RSI, the divergence back over here at the 2022 top. So the tops that we're looking at are here and here. But what I want to show you is what did the awesome oscillator do with those double tops that formed awesome oscillator in the weekly time frame. You can clearly see the divergence on the RSI. We even still have a potential divergence on the price oscillator and the MACD. They haven't curled up yet. They still may, and try to get above the signal line or just remain below it, as we have with the price oscillator back up at the 2022 top. So again, I think you're going to see something very similar to this. I told you this divergence formed in October, and I told you that if that did not play out, you would get a 2022 style topping process. And I talked about that last update, and I talked about that in my video just before Christmas Eve. But what I want to show you is the awesome oscillator in the weekly time frame. And here's the S&P weekly chart. We got a green awesome oscillator bar with the light volume trading week that we had for Christmas week, and we got a green bar, so we get a breakout on very, very light volume, but you get a green awesome oscillator bar. Now, when we have formed these other tops in 2025, back over here in 2022, again, you peaked right after that. A week or two later, you topped and then reversed, and you got the green bars that were followed by red bars. But I want to show you this here, and I want to look at these other tops because it's very, very similar. Now, what happened? What happened in December is December 2024. Again, we peaked, we moved slightly higher, began to sell off, and we saw green bars appear. The awesome oscillator, after we had just pushed slightly above the December peak, late November, early December there, pulled back, bars started turning back to green, bars had turned back to blue here in the weekly time frame. We got a bullish reversal of conditions, and then we popped above the January high right here, closing basis on an intraday high. We were right just 1 point below that level, as I've said, and then we pushed on through it here, and then at an intra-week high and began a reverse. That bar was still blue, but eventually we would get a bearish reversal of conditions. And look what happened. Again, you got to pop higher for a week or 2 weeks on a closing basis above the January high or above the December peak. If we look at it that way, you came up just slightly above it, pulled back, and then got another push or two above that level, but a couple of pushes. But eventually we saw the green bars, which is what we have right now, and it was followed the week or two higher from the January peak anyways, that was followed by a reversal bar being one of those bars after the intraday, a new intra-week high was reached. So the point is that we ended up completing a negative divergence there, which is what I think is happening now on the awesome oscillator in our current price action. Again, this was the February 2025 top, and then we sold off 25% back to support very quickly, peaking in late February, shortly after mid-February, dropping down to the April 7th low. The 2025 sell-off, you formed this divergence. I think we're going to see something similar to that right now. I think that's what's developing right here, is that you're going to get a green bar or two or three, much like, again, over here, but then it led to this. And I think you're going to see something very similar to that here. Turn it down. We may go up another week and then sell off, Right after the holidays or try to reverse next week, but I think you're going to see another green bar or two here, and then I think you're going to complete this divergence and get the sell-off. We have major negative divergences on the S&P 500 that have developed on things like the RSI, on the Russell. You've got that negative divergence on the MACD, and it's probably still carving out here on the S&P and the Russell, as I showed you in my last video. Again, major negative divergence, triple negative divergence on the RSI as well. Now, same thing at the 2022 peak. Again, I showed you we were up there for just 2 weeks after the breakout. We broke out, we were up there for a week, and then we pushed higher, but then that higher intra-week high was followed with a reversal bar. We got a reversal bar back to the 10-week moving average. You got a bar or two here. 2025, we got 3 bars. Here we got 2 bars, and you formed this divergence. It even goes further back what we have on the price oscillator in the weekly time frame. But you've got, in 2022, you got a couple green bars. You got a green bar with the breakout to a new high, and then you got another green bar the following week, which would be next week, on our lighter holiday trading volume, and that ended up being the reversal bar. And this followed into the February low over the next 8 weeks, including the reversal bar, and then a bounce, and then more selling. And you ended up selling off for the rest of the year. I think you'll see an uglier sell-off than what we had in 2022. I think you'll get something to that entire sell-off. This downturn, I think it will be greater than 20%, as I've said. Pick off the bear market, but we've got the green awesome oscillator bar this week in the weekly time frame. I expect you're going to see another one next week. Maybe you get a third one, but again, I would be looking for something like this with our double top. So the point here is we're getting these divergences, and you're getting it here on the awesome oscillator. You already have it in other places. The awesome oscillator is likely going to put the finishing touches on it next week or the week after that. You're going to get it, and then it's going to be followed by a sell-off. We broke out on Christmas Eve to a new high on very light volume on a partial trading day over the holiday trading, which is on light volume. As I said, right before Thanksgiving with the run up there, they're going to let it run up. They did. They sold a little bit. They're letting it run up some more. The institutions are going to continue to sell into the rally. The herd buys the topping process, going, it's a breakout. This is what they did with Bitcoin right before that sharp 36% sell-off. And again, the market is going to follow Bitcoin. We're doing exactly what we did back in 2022. The topping process is forming. Bitcoin, the same thing, but later formed a head and shoulders. It was possible the S&P was forming a head and shoulders, but Bitcoin did that after it had already peaked. It formed that head and shoulders pattern. It's doing exactly what Bitcoin did here, breaking out back into major resistance. And I talked about the resistance level in the weekly time frame in my last update, but wanted to show you these awesome oscillators because I think that you have a similar situation here with these double top patterns where you're going to get a couple green bars, and then you're going to see this breakout be a fake out and have it quickly fail. You had the same thing happen in 2020, right before the pandemic sell-off. And again, the awesome oscillator got one green bar, formed a Class B divergence where you have these real almost equal peaks there, but the price went higher. Again, moved just above the January high there. Breakout bar gave you one green awesome oscillator bar, is followed by a red bar. And again, you went slightly higher the following week, but then started to reverse, and it was followed by a sharp decline, a gap lower, and a 35% sell-off in about 3.5 weeks. You're going to see something very similar to this where you get a sharp decline. This was the 2020 peak, and again, these double top patterns that formed 2020. You had this little miniature double top over a series of several weeks here. You had it in 2022, had it in 2025. The S&P is likely doing it again. And each time you move just slightly above the previous high, and a week or two later you peaked, and then you began a sharp reversal, and you got the big rug pull. And you're likely going to see the same pattern, this double top pattern, repeat itself. And again, oftentimes double tops will go slightly higher. And here's our current double top pattern, slightly higher, trigger all the stops, and we're doing it in a very light volume. Once all the stops are triggered, then the big rug pull happens. It's the way the institutions get their kicks. So I think you're going to see something similar with this divergence right here that is forming. Again, you have a triple negative divergence here. I think you're going to see something very similar to what we had at these other peaks right here. And again, like I said, we could even go back and see the same thing in 2020. Each time when you went higher, it was about just over 1.5% higher. And again, that being above the December peak right here. Like I said, we moved just slightly above that January peak, but we were a couple weeks there above the December peak. I looked at both of those rallies above the January high and above the December high. But again, we have something similar to 2022, 2025, and 2020 going on here. So again, they say history doesn't repeat itself, but it often rhymes. And I think you have it rhyming in the peaks that I've shown you. All the recent tops formed with a double top pattern. That is rhyming, then we should see a peak very soon, possibly next week on the short trading week or the week after that. You could see it happen very, very quickly. And again, possibilities we have it reverse immediately. Get one green awesome oscillator bar like we did in 2020. I think these divergences are completing here with our holiday trading. Just look at the breakout volume that we had. Again, a partial trading day. Look at the breakout volume on the breakout here to a new high. That was the volume for the breakout on Christmas Eve. Not very convincing. And again, I want to just continue to point out, we continue to see the AI sell-off. The institutions are selling into the rally. We continue to see the selling pressure into the rallies over and over. You're going to see it here, but this next sell-off will take out the 100 period rather than bouncing off of it and move us back towards this November low. I think we'll be taking out that November low in the month of January. The institutions, again, ahead of Thanksgiving, they let it get run up and then they sell into the rally. Going into holidays, they let it run up again. And we'll see if we get the selling pressure. Sometimes with the holidays, 1 week is up and the next week is down on the holiday trading with Christmas and New Year's. It doesn't always play that out that way. Again, we could still up week next week and then have the selling pressure happen after the new year. But it is possible that we peak next week. And that's why I'm taking the time to show you the awesome oscillator. And again, those other tops I showed you, you break out, you get a new high. The following week, you go a little bit higher. Then that's followed by a reversal. And again, the new high is often followed selling pressure that creates a reversal bar. So we could see that form next week. And that's why I'm taking the time to show you these weekly awesome oscillators and the weekly price bars of what has happened in the past. Some of these other double tops in 2025 and 2022 and 2020. I think this divergence is going to play out here. So you could see that peak. Even a new high, or start seeing selling pressure immediately next week, or see a new high and followed by selling pressure at some point next week. And if not, the following week, pretty good chance it will happen. If it doesn't happen next week, that it would happen at the start of the following week. But again, in the next 2 weeks, I would be looking for that to happen because, like I said, break out to a new high, which we're doing on very, very light volume. It triggers all the stops. And then once that's done, then the selling pressure, the rug pull begins. And I think you'll see that happen again. I do expect the divergences are going to complete here. See that complete by next week. See if we get a new high. Talked about moving, 1.5, just over 1.5% above this peak. And if you do that, again, you're slamming into the trend line in our weekly time frame. And I showed you the chart in my last video and throughout last week. I'll link that video at the end of this one so you can see it if you didn't have a chance to see that chart. Another thing I find interesting is we've got the 10 below the 20 period moving average here. We'll see if the 10 remains below the 20 going into next week. Does this immediately fail, or we go a little higher and have it immediately fail? This is we've had 2 days now with above the previous high, two sessions. Now I want to touch on one other thing here. Again, the breakout we just had was on Christmas Eve. The breakout we had right here was the day after Christmas. That was a Monday in 2021. Christmas fell on a Saturday, and we broke out. We had the breakout the day after Christmas on that Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. Well, we traded till December 30th there, and then New Year's also on the weekend. Everybody came back. We had an up day, the first trading day of 2022, January 3rd, 2022. New Year's on the 1st was on Saturday, and then Sunday was the 2nd. The 3rd was Monday, and then the 4th we peaked. We went slightly higher, and again, you had the breakout. You peaked that week. You started to pull back a little bit. You went slightly higher, and then this happened. And again, 12.5% sell-off, nearly 15% sell-off over the next eight weeks from the actual peak. 7 if we don't include the peak over the next 8 weeks. You did turn down sharply. I think you'll get a bigger sell-off than what we saw here. But isn't it ironic that we broke out on Christmas Eve, and here we broke out the day after Christmas, extremely light volume in both cases, triggered the stops, and it was followed by the rug pull. And again, I think you're going to see forming these double top patterns with the negative divergences on the RSI, down here on the MACD. So I think you're going to see something very similar to this. But the 2022 top was also a breakout on light volume over the holidays. Not very convincing. When everybody came back from the holidays, the institutions began selling. Just found that very interesting. And again, here at market, we went up just over 1.5% above that previous peak. You're going to see something very similar to this. This went on being 7 days above the previous high. 7 sessions, I should say, and then pushed back down into that trading range, and it was a failed breakout, really marking the second peak of the double top pattern. I just want to address something about the Fed and the Bank of Japan. And again, the Fed has now paused, so we'll likely see things that will cause the market to sell off. Whether concerns about the banks, whether concerns about deterioration in the labor market or inflation or yields spiking higher, which is happening, whatever the catalyst or combination of things may be, that's going to create volatility. Again, the Fed has paused now. Also, we got the Japanese rate hikes, the Bank of Japan raising rates. I saw somebody who said, oh, we went higher on the S&P 500. That must mean it's a myth. I started to see the market sell off with it. The market and Bitcoin sold off 11% with it. Bitcoin rebounded back a little bit with it, still down 36% from the height of the low. The S&P pushing higher. So I saw somebody write, oh, this shows that the Bank of Japan rate hikes are a myth. They create volatility. And again, I've talked about the unwinding of the yen carry trade. They borrow yen, convert it to dollars or another currency, and then invest in stocks or crypto or bonds or whatever. Bank of Japan raising rates, that starts to create the unwinding of the yen carry trade, where they have to sell assets and pay back those yen-denominated loans. As I keep saying, this doesn't happen in one day. Some people are like so out of touch with reality. We went to a new high. This proves it. Well, we went to a new high back over here. The Bank of Japan raised rates. Bitcoin peaked. S&P went higher, diverged with Bitcoin, and later played catch up, and we still got the sell-off. And again, you're likely going to see the very same thing happen here. Here we sold off with the first rate hike in 2024, peaking with it. Here we sold off ahead of it. We sold off with it here. We sold off ahead of it here. And over here, initially we started to sell off, but then made a new high, broke out to a new high, and the next week was a reversal bar, and we got that. We're likely going to witness the same thing here, where we break to a new high, but then we see reversal either next week or the week after that or something like that. Broke out on Christmas Eve, an abbreviated session on extremely light volume, not very convincing. You got people out there saying, oh, the Bank of Japan rate hikes, winding the yen carry trade, this is a myth. Well, because we rallied the day they did it. We had already begun to sell off, and again, it happens over several weeks. Hello, weeks. Not in one day or, oh, we went to a new high. Well, we went to a new high over here. That didn't stop the 21% sell-off. And again, Bitcoin had already peaked. The market went slightly higher, diverged with Bitcoin, and followed Bitcoin. Very similar to what we're doing now. We're really repeating what happened in 2022. But this issue is also the unwinding of the yen carry trade is going to create volatility over several weeks. Not in one day. Some people just have such unrealistic expectations. I keep saying it. This is over several weeks. I still think I'm going to be right about the NASDAQ peaking on October 29th. I think it's going to get a lower high, diverge with the S&P, and I warned you ever since the October peak that was still a possibility if we get a 2022 style topping process, which often the NASDAQ and S&P diverge from one another. Again, NASDAQ to sell off like Bitcoin ahead of the Bank of Japan raising rates, rebounding a little bit as Bitcoin did, not moving to a new high. And again, we're still below the level where we started to sell off with the lower high. The peak back over here in October, we're still below those levels. Again, this is going to happen over several weeks. S&P is breaking out on light volume on Christmas Eve, so this proves that the Bank of Japan rate hikes unwinding the yen carry trade, it proves that's a myth. Absolutely incredible how delusional some people can be. Several weeks, not in one day. Hello. NASDAQ last time did go a little bit higher right after, again, diverging with Bitcoin as we're seeing the S&P do right now, but it still sold off nearly 26%. And that was the catalyst along with concerns about the tariffs, but that was one of the catalysts. So too with Bitcoin. Every time we've seen the Bank of Japan raise rates, seen some severe volatility surrounding Bitcoin here, nearly 30% drop, 27.5% here, over 29%, here 30%. Again, you're likely going to move down to the 200-week moving average with Bitcoin. The market will begin to play catch up. When we had the 2021 top with Bitcoin, it dropped as it did here, consolidated as it's done now for getting the next leg down. And that's when the market played catch up in the double top that we had with the S&P in 2022 and the lower high, that Adam and Eve style double top with NASDAQ, much like what we have with MicroStrategy right now. As Bitcoin got its next leg down, they played catch up. And again, I think Bitcoin's forming a massive head and shoulders. I think it will take out the April low as the S&P and NASDAQ move back towards those April lows. Play catch up. Again, Bitcoin's dropped nearly 11% ahead of the Bank of Japan raising rates. Rebounded a little bit, but it's going sideways. Again, still off of the 94,000 area. Here it is at 87,000. Getting ready for its next leg down. This consolidation, likely a continuation of the next leg down, of the continuation of the previous decline, I should say, for the next leg down. S&P's moving to new highs. Breaking out on Christmas Eve on super light volume on a partial trading day. So this proves that the Bank of Japan rate hikes unwinding the yen carry trade. That proves it's a myth. Absolutely incredible. And this is going to happen over several weeks. Say it with me. Several weeks. Some people are just so unrealistic. It's incredible. Bitcoin's warning you, and you can see my latest Bitcoin video at the end of this one. I'll link it there. Bitcoin's warning that the stock market's about to play catch up, and this is unfolding the same way it did in 2021 and early 2022 with Bitcoin. Bitcoin will probably bottom before the stock market. Again, Bitcoin with the 2021-2022 sell-off, it bottomed in January, a couple months after the peak. As the market played catch up, it rallied back up and eventually got a higher low in February, and the market moved to a new low. We'll probably see something similar to that. I wanted to address the Japanese rate hikes. It is going to create more volatility. It will be one of the catalysts, but over several weeks. Institutions are letting the S&P run up, false breakout. Bitcoin did the same thing back up here. Bitcoin, we had a peak right here. It was a fake breakout right there from July to the August peak, and then we did it again right here in August. We did it right here moving just above this high, and you were there for a day and then reversed hard, and this was major resistance in the weekly time frame, very similar to the resistance that we turned off in October on the S&P weekly chart, just under it right now, and the major resistance we're at in the monthly time frame on the S&P.